I am going to show you how to use one of my all-time favorite photography tools, the Expodisc. My name is Kelly Hoagland and I'm a family photographer near Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I first started using the Expodisc in probably like 2019. I was really starting to take my photography work pretty seriously, but I was just frustrated. I felt like I wasn't getting like the colors and the consistency and the warmth in my images that I was really wanting. I was using the Sony a7 III and the auto white balance is just very cool on those cameras. And I'll show you kind of like a auto white balance versus the Expodisc, and it's pretty drastic. So at that point, I was just using auto white balance. I was shooting in manual, but I just wasn't getting the images that I was wanting. I felt like everything was just kind of like cool and dull and just kind of lifeless. So I did some Googling and I stumbled upon the Expodisc. And this is kind of embarrassing, but when I first started using it, I didn't read the instructions. So I was literally just using it to set my white balance, and it wasn't until later, like I literally even had the thought, like, why is it called the Expodisc? Like, why isn't it like the white balance disc or something? Like, that sounds like exposure. Like, I completely did not understand that it's actually an incident light meter. And so it's meant to be used to set your exposure and then set your white balance. So once I figured out that it was a two-step process, I felt like my work just kind of completely jumped to the next level. It was so much more consistent in terms of the brightness of my images, but then also just the creaminess and the warmth and like the naturalness of the skin tones that I was capturing as well. So I'm going to show you in this video how to use the Expodisc and how to use it correctly, which I actually used the newest model. This is the V3, the old model is the V2. And I happened to reach out to the company. Basically, I was being a total fangirl. I was like, I love your product. Like, I use it inside, I use it outside, natural light, flash photography. Anytime I'm picking up my camera, I am using the Expodisc. So they actually sent me this newer model, the V3, and asked me to try it out. And so I've written an entire blog post where I compare the old model with the new, and then I also explain how to use the Expodisc like in written form. So if that's something you'd like to see, I will link it in the video notes below as well for you to check out. So I took the V3 with me on a little photography outing with my family. There's this park that's like 45 minutes from my house that I have been dying to photograph it in during the spring because it has all of these beautiful blooming trees. But if you have a young family, you know how hard it is sometimes to get everybody dressed and out the door, especially near bedtime, because I like was really wanting to hit it at golden hour. I've been there before, like early afternoon, and it was not my favorite. Like, I wanted to be there when it was glowy and beautiful and the light was even. So we made it happen, and I brought a camera to film some behind the scenes of actually using the Expodisc on a session. So before we dive in though to that video, I did just want to briefly kind of explain how the Expodisc works. I feel like it's helpful to kind of understand how it works with your equipment. So as I mentioned, it's an incident light meter. And if that's a term that you've never heard before, incident light meters actually measure the light that's hitting your subject, like falling onto your subject, rather than measuring the light that's bouncing off of your subject. So if you are used to using your in-camera light meter, what you probably do is you like stand where you're gonna take the picture, you look through the viewfinder and you point it towards your subject, and then you choose your aperture, your shutter speed, your ISO, based on what the in-camera light meter is saying, and you're trying to get it to 0. When you're doing it that way, you are relying on the light that's bouncing off of your subject. And the issue that I have with that, or have found with that, is that your camera doesn't always make good decisions. It is not as smart as you. Like, I feel like that's a mantra I have. You are smarter than your camera. And so it can be easily like fooled, basically. So let's say, for instance, you're taking an image and your subject has fair skin, but they're wearing like a black shirt and they're standing in front of like really dense, dark woods, like a bunch of greenery. Your camera is going to see that in its frame and say, oh my goodness, it's so dark, there's not enough light. You need to like increase your ISO or open up your aperture. Like you need to make the exposure brighter. Well, what that will do is wash out the skin tones of the fair person. And as a portrait photographer, like the way that skin tones look in my images is really important to me. Like I want my people to look natural and like themselves. So your camera can sometimes make poor choices because it doesn't completely understand what it's looking at. It's not a human. So with an incident meter, when I'm using the Expodisc specifically, what I do instead of pointing it at my subject, I actually go and I stand where I will be placing my subject, and I point my camera back towards where I intend to stand to take the picture. That way, what it is measuring is the light that's actually hitting my subject. Like, that's what's coming in through the lens. So to use the Expodisc, you stand where your subject is, you point back towards where you will be standing to take the picture, and you cover your lens with the Expodisc, and you want the honeycomb facing out, and there's like a flat solid surface that you want against your lens, which this newer version actually comes with a set ring that you can screw into your lens, and then it really blocks out, like, it doesn't block out or blocks out any like light spillage or light slippage. Like, you get a very like accurate exposure reading. I actually, for this session, used my 78-75mm zoom lens. So this is for an 85mm lens, so it doesn't fit. So I didn't use it for this session. And if you have a set ring that doesn't fit some of your lenses, it's not a big deal. You can just cover up your lens fully with the Expodisc. So I cover it up, and then I choose my exposure settings, my aperture, my shutter speed, my ISO. And it's working with your in-camera light meter. You're trying to get the light meter to say 0, but you're just using it basically to filter the light that's going to be hitting your subject, and it just creates a much more consistent and accurate exposure. So once you dial in your exposure and you're like, okay, it's at 0, these are the settings that I want, you then set a custom white balance, which I'm not going to go into those steps in this video because every like camera make and model is a little bit different. I may do like a future video where I show you how to do it on the a7 IV, the Sony a7 IV, or the Sony a7 III. Those are the two cameras that I use most consistently, so I might do that video in the future if that's something that you want to see. But so just Google it. Like, Google how to set a custom white balance for your particular camera model, and I'm sure you'll find the answer for that. Okay, so I'm here on location with my family, and I sent them for a quick little walk so that I could record this and show you how I use the Expodisc to set my exposure and my white balance when I'm taking photos. So my plan is to place my daughters on that little white blanket with the pink trees in the background. And currently it's about like 45 minutes or an hour before sunset, so the sun is low. I kind of have them in like open shade with like a little bit of back side lighting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go stand where I will be placing my daughters, and I'm going to point my camera back in the direction that I will be shooting in, and I will be covering my lens with the Expodisc. So I point it back towards where I will be shooting, and then I will dial in my exposure settings. So I'm going to pick my aperture, my shutter speed, my ISO, and my goal is to get the light meter in my camera to read 0. When it reads 0, then I know that I have a balanced exposure. So once it reads 0, though, I will keep the Expodisc on my lens, and then I will set a custom white balance reading while it's covered up. And then after that, I'll put this away. And like, unless the light drastically changes, or, you know, it is sunset, so if it starts getting darker as I'm photographing them, I might pull it back out to take another reading or to adjust settings. But otherwise, I just shoot to my heart's content after that. So I'm going to show you how I set this up. that you found this video about how to use the Expodisc helpful. If you're interested in purchasing one, I will put a link in the video notes below where you can find the Expodisc. Thank you so much for watching.